But I also want to thank NCTAF for putting this event together and taking the conversation that we started a year ago further, looking into what can comparative data say about the environments that we have for professional learning. I think that's a really very, very important and a theme where comparative data can show us some insights. This was also a theme that actually was very much at the center of the last summit of the teaching profession, which Secretary Duncan launched a few years back, which is now taking its own life. This time it was hosted by Canada. There's a lot of interesting discussions around, how do we create an environment in which teachers can grow in their professional careers, away from the kind of industrial work organization that still dominates schools to a more professional work organization. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Just a reminder on the TALIS survey. The idea of the survey was really to give teachers a voice. In the United States, that voice is still sort of subdued. We didn't get enough teachers to join it. In the last round, we hope this time we're going to get better participation, as we do in most countries. We also get more countries. In the last round, we had 34 countries taking part. The next round is going to be over 50. So you can see actually more and more countries are interested in taking a comparative perspective on this. You see that on the screen here. The idea was really about developing teaching as a profession. And this is about, how do we get the right people applying for the job? How do we support them well in their continued professional development? Our topic today. How do we actually recognize good teaching, help teachers to grow in their careers? And last but not least, to improve the societal view on teachers. And I want to start with just one slide on that, actually, which shows you the share of teachers who feel their work being valued is actually quite closely related to the learning outcomes that we observe in the PISA test. We don't know what the causal nature of that relationship is. Maybe where teachers do a great job, society will respect it. Or maybe where society does have great respect for teachers, you're going to get the best people applying for the job, the most interesting people. But I think that is an important dimension that we need to keep in mind. How can we improve the value of teachers in society? But I want to do something more. Why is professional learning so important? Some people say, and I've heard that many times in the United States, well, it's all very easy. All you need to do is attract the teachers from the top third of the graduate distribution. Get the best people applying for the teaching job, and you're going to solve every problem in schooling. I wanted to find out about it. So I actually looked at the graduate distribution in different countries. The blue bar is about the middle half of the skill distribution of college graduates. And you can see basically in Finland and Japan, college graduates tend to be very highly skilled. In Poland and Italy, less so. But where are teachers? Well, here you see the test scores of teachers. And you can see that there's actually not a single country that attracts its teachers from the top third of the graduate distribution. Everybody wants to get the best teachers. Everybody, the finance people want them, the engineers. That's very clear. There's strong competition for talent. And these data show actually, in most countries, teachers are pretty normal people in terms of the skills that they have. If you go to Japan or Finland, there you can say the graduates are highly skilled, and the teachers actually do come from the higher end of the skill distribution. But, you can go to Sweden, and there you can see overall the graduates are highly skilled, but, teachers are coming more from the lower end of the skill distribution. You go to the United States, I've heard many times people saying, well, whoever goes to teacher college, is not going to be particularly bright. But actually, what the data show us, they are pretty average people again. Typical people in the skill distribution. This is from our survey of adult skills, where we surveyed the workforce with numeracy and literacy skills. And actually, the point I want to make is basically, and you look at an interesting example is Poland. Poland is not very fortunate in having not sort of a great, highly skilled population. And the teachers actually come rather from the lower end. But Poland is one of the most rapidly improving education systems these days. And I think what these data show you together is that, it's great if you can attract talent into teaching. But what you do with those people is 100 times more important. That's why professional learning makes such a difference, and that's, I think, why it's a great theme for today's discussion. I want to start with something that is very important, and that is, Even if you had attracted the best and brightest people 20 years ago, the world today for teachers is very, very different. You can see this in the evolution of skill demand. The kind of things that are easiest to teach, easiest to test, routine cognitive skills, are declining in value in our labor market in the United States. We are seeing an increase in the demand for creative skills, problem-solving skills, non-routine analytic skills, an increased demand, for social skills, the green line. The world is changing, and therefore, even if you have the best teachers, not giving them the opportunities to grow in their professional careers, to continue to learn, to continue to adapt, is not going to help education systems keep moving forward, keep advancing. Now, that's about 21st century skills. What about 21st century pedagogies? One of the questions we ask teachers about what they believe about pedagogy. And these are the results. You can actually see in most countries, the United States is actually exactly on the average. Most teachers have a pretty good sense of what it takes to be a good teacher. And my role as a teacher is to facilitate students' own inquiry. Students should be allowed to think of solutions to practical problems themselves because I'm going to tell them what the answer is. All of those things are pretty well established for most teachers. There's actually surprisingly little variation on this across countries. You find countries like Singapore and Japan, Korea, always in front, but the differences are not very much. Most teachers have a pretty good sense of what it takes to do great teaching. But actually, when you look at what they do in practice in the classroom, the picture looks already very, very different. And that is very important. You think about, for example, students work in small groups to come up with a joint solution. We talked about the rise in the demand for social skills. Where do you learn social skills? By working in a collaborative environment in schools. Does it happen frequently? Actually, not very much. That is actually this is a good example for this. Or students work on projects that require at least 1 week to complete. Doesn't happen very frequently in most of the countries. And again, those are the kind of things that when you look at pedagogical beliefs, is what teachers would want to do. So there is a gap between what teachers know needs to be done and what they actually do in the classroom. And that gap is so persistent across many countries that you ask yourself, what are the barriers that prevent teachers to actually follow what they think is right? And I want to come to one of them, and this is instructional leadership. Professional learning is something that requires very, very strong instructional leadership at the school level. Have a look at this data. And these are data that we haven't yet included in our book, but that are quite interesting. Teachers the principle, I take action to ensure that teachers feel responsible for their own students' learning outcomes. Only 20% of the teachers say that, the principals say they do that very often. A lot of them say they do that sometimes, and a few more. In some countries, it's a big higher, but again, there's a lot of gaps, and in some countries, actually, you find fewer than this now. I take action to ensure that teachers take responsibility for improving their own teaching skills. This is about professional learning. I, as a principal, am responsible that teachers grow in their careers. Again, you can see only about 18% of principals saying that that's a matter of course for me. I do that always. Many do that sometimes. If you go to Malaysia, they're at the top of the list here. So I collaborate with teachers to solve classroom discipline problems. Again, 30% say they do that very often, but the majority of principals say, well, often or sometimes. You can go through this variable by variable, and you can actually see that there's a lot of room in most countries, actually, to better support teachers with professional learning at their schools. Collaboration of principals from other schools. You wish that would take place everywhere, that principals are not just caring about their own school, but caring about the education system, learning from other schools. And again, some do that very often, but you talk about a small minority, and the majority of cases is actually lost rarer. A lot of variability of this across countries, but overall, I think it shows us that the issue of instructional leadership that is so critical for professional learning could be developed better. School decisions and collaborative school culture. The school provides staff with opportunities to actively participate in school decisions. 30% strongly agree, a lot agree. If you go to Finland and Estonia, it's 100%. That's really interesting. Every principal tells you that. There is a collaborative school culture that is characterized by mutual support. The school provides parents or guardians with opportunities to actively participate in school decisions. Again, there seems to be room for most countries to do better on those kinds of dimensions. I want to touch on another aspect, and this is actually what are the opportunities for teachers to learn. They're very different cultures, what the role of a teacher is. If you're a teacher in the United States, you spend most of your time teaching in the classroom. If you're a teacher in Shanghai, in China, or in Japan, you do at most 3 courses a day, typically 2. But you actually work longer than a US teacher in the school. You have lots of other responsibilities. You work with parents, you work with other teachers, you actually design lesson plans. You are the designer of the instructional system, not just the one who implements it. Time to learn. Let's have a look at some data on this. Actually, what do teachers themselves say they need in terms of professional development? This is the average. That's the United States. Number 1 in most countries has to do with teaching students with special needs, not engaging with diversity. It's not so strongly pronounced in the United States in terms of teachers' own aspirations. Technology comes out strongly almost anywhere. Our teachers are confronted with modern technologies, and sort of getting the right professional training for this is very important. And then sort of it goes down, but there's a lot of express need for teachers to advance. There's a lot of variability in this. I want to show you just a couple of examples. Teaching students with special needs, Japan and Korea come out way ahead of any other country. And here you start to get puzzled, because actually those are countries where teachers do really well on that. Social background, for example, has very little of an effect on learning outcomes, because teachers are typically very, very good in tailoring the learning environments to the needs of individual students in those countries. But still, they want to become better. Or take here pedagogical competencies. The Korean teachers say, I really need to become better, 30%. And you ask yourself, well, look at the PISA results. Aren't they really good? So maybe those data tell us a little bit about the aspirations that teachers have for becoming better teachers. The need for professional development. For example, in England, it's only 2% of the teachers who say, I want to become better in my pedagogical world. Or are the 98% perfect already? No. Or is the kind of professional learning opportunity not suited to them? Or think about knowledge of the curriculum. Again, the Koreans come out number 1. They seem to be doing a good job, but they want to become better. In Spain, most of the teachers say, well, no, thank you, I know everything I need to know. Very little aspiration. And maybe this tells us something about the kind of aspirations that teachers themselves have, or B, about the quality of the learning that is available to them. And I'm going to come to this in a moment, but I think we should look at those kinds of data carefully. They don't tell us necessarily about the reality of professional development, but they say something about how teachers themselves aspire to professional learning. What are the barriers? Why do teachers not do what they might want to do? First of all, of course, and that's typical in most countries, professional development conflicts with my work schedule. Now everybody's busy, so that is often a problem. There are no incentives to participate in such activities. And that's a real worry, because we could be changing this. We could build professional development much more closely into career structures and lots of things. I think that's certainly something that could change. It's too expensive. There is no relevant professional development offered. Also very important. Teachers do not see that what they can do is actually relating to the kind of real-world problems that they face every day, and so on. So some of those barriers I think we should take to heart, and there's certainly something that we can do about this in most of the education system. Here it gets interesting, and this is some new analysis that we have done. Professional learning can take place in many, many contexts. Professional learning can take place, you send people back to universities, it can take place in your school. There are many ways how you can provide opportunities for teachers. And there are 2 ways that we have studied here. One is basically when it's embedded in school. It's part of the life of schools. Professional learning takes place within the context of a school through professional learning communities, through other means. And that's, for example, very common in Singapore, Abu Dhabi, Australia, England, Canada, and so on. Not so common in Belgium, Flanders, not so common in Finland, not so common in France. And then you have professional learning that takes place out of school. No? You send people somewhere else. And you can see that those patterns actually are very, very different across countries. In some countries, the emphasis is more on bringing outside expertise into the day. In the other case, it's more about integrating into the daily school life. If you are in Singapore, for example, you get about 100 hours every year in terms of professional development. There's a lot of investment made in every teacher to actually continue to grow. Many teachers in Singapore don't start their career with a master's degree or PhD. They actually start with a bachelor degree. But virtually every teacher will complete a master's degree or a PhD during their career. There's a lot of integration between sort of learning and working in those kinds of countries. The question, of course, is, what's better? Do we know anything about the impact of professional development in different settings? And in fact, we studied this, and I think that's really a very interesting kind of analysis. This tells us something about the impact of professional development on basically teachers' perceived effectiveness. No? We can't measure that directly. We can only measure this through teachers' perception on how effective they are, self-efficacy. And this is non-school embedded professional development. I look at these lines and they go in opposite directions. What do I see from this? Actually, the more of this professional development you embed in the clinical context of the school, of the classroom, the greater the impact. The more you remove it from the school, the less the impact. Why this is like this, probably you are all better experts than me to judge this, but I think it tells us something that the way in which we organize professional learning can make a difference in terms of how teachers feel is making a difference to their lives. The closer the professional learning is to the classroom, to the school, to the clinical environment, the more teachers believe they make a difference. The more removed it is, the less it makes a difference. I think, again, this gives us a lot of food for thought, and countries clearly have quite different patterns on those kinds of outcomes. There's another way that you can look at this. You can look at actually how does professional learning take place. We have sort of divided this up into different categories. There's a collaborative environment. You work with the principal, you work with other teachers to shape the environment. That's very common in the countries at the bottom of the screen. That's the blue bar. You can have managed this by the teachers, by the school leaders. That's the red bar. Or you can have run this by teachers. Teacher-led professional development. And you can see that those kinds of combinations vary hugely across countries. There are very different cultures in terms of the environments that we create for teachers to learn. Again, what's the right balance? It's probably very hard to distill, but in fact, when we studied those things, we actually found that, at least in terms of teachers' own reports, the kind of balanced collaborative approach had the highest impact. And I come back to this over and over. Teacher collaboration is generally seen as a very powerful device to raise the impact as perceived by teachers. Teacher-led and leader-led kind of professional development came much lower in this kind of assessment. This is across countries, and there are a lot of nuanced patterns that one has to study, but I think it's an interesting fact to see how different professional development differently is organized across countries. One point I want to make is that professional collaboration isn't just leading to more advanced degrees of self-efficacy. It's also something that seems to be driving not only self-efficacy, but also job satisfaction. What we found is that the more frequently teachers participate in collaborative practices, the more they were satisfied with their job, and also the greater sense they had of their own effectiveness. So creating collaborative environments in our school system seems to be generally associated with better effectiveness. And this is, again, an area where we can learn enormously from the education systems in East Asia, where the emphasis on collaboration is just very, very strong. You almost do nothing in isolation as a teacher. You watch each other's classrooms, you work together, you plan your lessons, you design your lessons, you evaluate your lessons, and so on. If you are in Shanghai in China, you know they have a great platform where teachers can upload their lesson plans. And the more other teachers are going to comment, criticize, improve your own lesson plans, the more popular you're going to become in the education system. And at the end of the day, when you're going to be evaluated by your principal, they're not only evaluating you on how good you are with your own students in your own class, but they want to know what contribution did you make as a teacher to the improvement of the profession. Very, very important. Let me show you some data on this. Here you see basically different categories of frequency of doing various things. And what you can see is the more teachers say they jointly teach as a team in the same class, the more effective they felt they were. The more frequently teachers said they observed other teachers' classes and provide feedback, the more effective they felt to be as a teacher. Classroom observation. The more they engaged in joint activities across different classes, or the more they participated, and this is professional learning, in collaborative professional learning, the more effective they felt to be as a teacher. And these things are not rocket science. They're actually quite simple to organize and to analyze. We have plenty of really good examples for those kinds of things. Let's have a look at, when we know how important collaboration is, how frequently does it happen? That actually, when it comes to informal exchange and coordination, here on the left side, you see that happens quite a bit. Teachers are generally very social people. They exchange information, they sort of coordinate their work and so on. But when it actually, and this is the United States, when it actually comes to the kind of deep professional collaboration that I was talking before, the bars get a lot shorter. Actually, when you look at the actual percentages here, teachers saying to do this at least once per month, they get actually very, very small. Some variation across countries. Now, when you look, for example, at team teaching, that's more popular in Italy and Denmark and Japan and so on. When it comes to collaborative professional development, Israel, Singapore, Australia, and the United States seem to be doing more of that. Joint activities, very rare. And classroom observation, one of the most powerful devices identified by teachers themselves, is actually very rare in most of the countries for which we have comparative data. So again, the emphasis on professional collaboration seems to be a very important device for strengthening opportunities for growth in teachers' career. And we also see that teachers' work schedule comes out very differently across countries. For example, if you're in Finland, you don't have to worry very much about school management as a teacher. Now, you can really focus on the instructional context. When you are in Japan, you spend about 8 hours on extracurricular activities. Now, that's working with individual students, that's working with parents. When the school children get in trouble with the police is not going to call the parents, are going to call the teachers. Now, there's a lot of emphasis on the role of Japanese teachers on taking care of students. In Sweden, that doesn't make much of a difference. Now, student counseling, again, in Korea, several hours per day. Administrative work, if you're in Finland, you're lucky, you don't have to do very much of this. If you're in Korea, you spend 6 hours on this per week on this kind of activity. So the idea, this tells you something about the kind of idea we have of teachers and their role, and therefore their need for professional growth. Last point I want to really make is about feedback. Professional learning is great, but what information do teachers themselves get out of this? And one of the things that we know is that actually feedback has a big impact, reported by teachers themselves, on their personal aspirations, on their pedagogical work, and also on their professional ideas. The bars are a little bit shorter for the United States. I can't tell you why, but in most countries, actually, they're pretty consistent. It does make a lot of a difference for most teachers. They say that basically getting feedback had an important impact on the way in which they work. So you say, well, that's great, so let's give them feedback. But then actually you look at the numbers, and we actually see that on average across countries, just about half of the teachers say they receive any feedback from their teaching from 1 or 2 sources. Every second teacher, they may get evaluated, but they don't get any feedback. Only 1 in 5 teachers receive feedback from multiple sources, 3 or more sources. And that's very important. We have actually learned that it's this kind of multiple perspectives that are so important. So there's a lot that countries could do to improve the mechanisms through which professional learning and professional work actually translate into improved practice in the long run. When you look at this, for example, teachers, it's just an example, teachers' feedback from direct classroom observation. You can see here in the case of the United States, it looks quite good. Classroom observation is very rare, but when your principal comes into your classroom, in 80% of the cases, you're going to hear from him or her. That's good. But actually, this is not the only source. You can always think about school management, and you can look to other teachers and look at this for the United States. You can say actually the principal comes back, but when your teachers, your colleagues visit your classroom, you rarely hear back from them. And there are countries where things look much worse. If you look to Spain, you know, someone may come into your classroom, but neither the principal nor the teachers nor school management will ever talk to you about it. And that's, I think, again, it shows us that the kind of systems that we have, you know, doing classroom observation is one thing, but then providing the kind of link, the delivery chain to translate that back into the potential for improvement are very, very limited. And I think what is most surprising is that even colleagues, teachers, you know, your teaching colleagues, are not always giving you the kind of information that you want to get from them to improve your own teaching practices. What are the consequences of feedback? Average, the United States. If you, for example, are in, no, this is just, if you are in Singapore or in Poland, the best performing teacher in the school says is also receiving the greatest recognition. I'm not talking about money here. It's about, you know, respect and anything. Singapore and Poland seem to be very meritocratic systems. Now, but basically, you know, you make a greater effort and it's going to be recognized. If you are in Spain, if you are in the Netherlands, in Belgium, or in Norway, you know, it doesn't seem to make any difference. No? Not a very meritocratic environment. No? If you are in Chile and you do consistently a poor job, you know, something is going to happen. If you're in Japan or the Netherlands or Norway, you know, nothing is likely to happen. So the consequences that arise from feedback, either in terms of professional learning or otherwise, are often really very modest, very limited. What can we do about it? We have actually identified 4 dimensions on this. You can, of course, regroup educators. You can think about, you know, professional learning is about, you know, and in Australia and the United Kingdom have done a lot on this, to basically make sure that teachers have possibilities, opportunities to work with other teachers in a very organized framework. You can, at the same time, you know, regroup the learners. And that's something that, you know, give learners a sense of belonging and engagement, making sure that there's flexibility on this. And you find this in Denmark and Chile very pronounced. And this is another way of creating opportunities for professional growth for teachers. You can work on the scheduling of learning. Seems very simple, but most countries have actually very, very rigid mechanisms for scheduling learning. But we have learned, actually, if you want to sort of make deeper learning, those kinds of things happen, you need to actually provide for the flexibility for this. And so on, but it is actually quite seems a hard thing to do in our school system. And finally, you know, to widen the pedagogic repertoire that teachers have through professional learning. Those are the kind of 4 levers that we identify in our analysis. But overall, I must say, and I want to conclude with this, the picture is actually quite sobering. You know, unfortunately, one of the things that we always want to do is actually compare teachers with other professions. You know. What is the investment in professional learning across high-skilled professions? I don't have those kinds of comparisons, but when you look at the education profession in itself, it does seem in most countries still quite limited. Thank you very much.